And we are live. Okay, we're live now, and I'm here to chat about impeachment. Okay, so several months ago, I made a video about is Trump going to get impeached? And I said that, well, more than likely, yes, it looks like it's heading in that direction. Will he be removed from office? Absolutely not. Now, that doesn't necessarily make me a genius to make that prediction. When the Republicans control the Senate, that was pretty much a foregone conclusion. But at the same time, I think as an educational exercise, this has been very helpful. And so I figured I'd just come in here and let's talk about it. What questions do y'all have? This whole process has now worked its way out for the third time in the history of the United States. We have now had three presidents who have been impeached by the House of Representatives, and every time that has ended in the president not being removed from office. So let's see, we've got about 30 people in here. Greetings, Peter. Okay, what is it that y'all want to say? Any observations or anything like that? There are several things that we could talk about here. Some folks want to say hi. All right, made it to a Tom Ritchie stream. All right, yes, President Trump was acquitted on both of the articles of impeachment by the U.S. Senate. In the second article, now the first article was abuse of power. And in that case, Mitt Romney, the Republican senator from Utah, also the unsuccessful Republican nominee for president in 2012, as I'm sure President Trump will probably be quick to remind us about pretty soon, that he voted guilty on abuse of power. So on the first article, you had a 52-48 vote for acquittal. Now, remember that you need 67 votes in order to convict the president. It has to be a 2/3 vote of the Senate in order to convict. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this may be the first time that there actually has not even been a majority to convict. If we look at the Clinton impeachment, for example, let's see. Let me go ahead and just verify this. But during the Clinton impeachment, the Republicans controlled the Senate. And so you had I believe, a majority voting for the charges. But let's take a quick look here. Okay, so impeaching Bill Clinton and then removal. Okay, so as far as that goes, you had with Clinton, you had a couple of articles of impeachment, and then you had 50, let's see. So you had 40, you had 50. It was a 50-50 vote, and then a 55-45 vote not guilty. Okay, so you had two articles of impeachment with Clinton. One of them was a 50-50 vote, and one of them was a 55-45 vote. Now, of course, then the first impeachment, Andrew Johnson, that was just one vote shy of getting that 2/3 threshold. So as far as that goes, let's see. As far as that goes, I typically lean Republican. I don't try to hide that. That's not something that I necessarily. I mean, I think that it's always good to at least tell people where you're coming from, because that way people can filter that information. So yeah, I'm not really shy about that. Now, as far as that goes, we've got a few things. Oh, I've got an Australian here. That's great. And so as far as that goes, now Mitt Romney is kind of a curious case too. I made a video a few years ago, back in 2016. Mitt Romney, now he accepted Trump's endorsement in 2012. And then in 2016, he gave what I called a philippic. A philippic is a type of speech going back to ancient Greece and Rome. This goes back to Demosthenes, who delivered a series of speeches against Philip II, who was Alexander the Great's father, about why the Athenians should resist Philip II. And then Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, the famous Roman orator, also delivered a series of philippics against Marcus Antonius, who we know, thanks to Shakespeare, as Mark Antony. So, those two, they weren't that successful. Mitt Romney delivered a philippic against Donald Trump in the 2016 election. So it's been kind of an interesting sort of thing here, because there's been some bad blood between the two of them ever since then. And, whether you think that Mitt Romney voted for reasons of conscience or just because he's, got an axe to grind with President Trump, there are certainly some credible explanations on both sides of that. Now, Romney also kind of had the distinction of being one of few senators that really has the luxury of voting how he wants, because he's rich. and he lives in a heavily Republican state, and he doesn't have to rely on interest groups to finance his campaigns. And he's got a lot of name recognition. He's pretty popular in his state. But still, Romney kind of hedged his bets. He voted guilty on one charge and then not guilty on the other. So showed some degree of party loyalty. But other than Mitt Romney, it was on a strictly party line vote that we saw there. Now, as far as that, somebody's asking, does Trump make it through another term? Now, what we want to consider about this, okay, remember that Nancy Pelosi was very resistant to impeachment for a long time until when this Ukraine thing broke, her caucus started to, just push very hard for it, and she had to relent. Now, the reason why Pelosi was initially hesitant, when people say, oh, we want to impeach Trump, is the first order of business when the Democrats took the House. The thing is that impeachment, with the Clinton impeachment, for example, that ended up helping Clinton and hurting Republicans at the end of the day. And when we think about what's going on here, Gallup polling just released yesterday. President Trump had the highest approval rating that he's ever had on Gallup polling, or at least in some time, at least in the last 2 years, that maybe 3 years, that President Trump has got a 49% approval rating. So what we've seen is actually the impeachment process has resulted in Trump's numbers going slightly up, which the thing is, when you have this impeachment process, at the end of the day, it's a not guilty verdict, then, this is something that, we'll see, but it looks like, if anything, this has helped Trump politically. Now, the other things that you want to look at with Gallup is 41% of the country in a recent poll said that they believe that the country's going in the right direction. Now, that's a minority, but we've got to think about this is the highest it's been in the last 15 years. So when you look at that, when you look at it from that angle, that, most people are going to say, my life's not going that well, no matter how great it is. A lot of people like to be miserable. So you're seldom going to find like a majority of people saying the country's going in a good direction. Certainly not in the last 15 years since the Iraq war and everything that's come with that. So when 41% of the country saying, hey, I think things are generally going pretty well, and then 60 something percent of the country says that the economy is going well. So, definitely you want to follow the Democratic primary, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't count Trump out, of the 2020 election. I think that a lot of that's going to depend on who the Democrats nominate, or whether they can even, count their votes accurately during the primaries and such. Let's see here. Definitely. So somebody says definitely gets another term. The thing is, definitely is a strong word, but at the same time, that's, something that the impeachment process probably made it more likely that he'll be reelected than if it hadn't happened at all. Now, somebody's asking me about Pelosi ripping up the State of the Union speech. Okay, so that was something that was a very interesting moment, to say the least. And I guess my take on that whole thing is, I think that people have had some very valid concerns about the way that President Trump has, in some ways, compromised the dignity of the presidency. I don't think the presidency will ever be the same after Donald Trump. And I think that people have voiced some legitimate concerns that his behavior in this case has been unpresidential, or maybe his general demeanor has been unpresidential. But then last night, I saw some of the same people who've been most critical of President Trump and his behavior praising Nancy Pelosi for tearing up the State of the Union address on the dais. And so for me, it seemed like, okay, if somebody's going to criticize Trump for being unpresidential, would you also criticize the Speaker of the House for conduct unbecoming of the House Speaker? Because that certainly, was not something that you would expect, in a Republican form of government, in a legislative chamber, in the dignity of the offices that are assembled there. You wouldn't expect that to be the conduct from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So my take on that is, if somebody's going to criticize Trump for being unpresidential, then they need to be equally ready to criticize Nancy Pelosi for behavior that is unbecoming of the Speaker of the House. I definitely think, I mean, certainly she had a right to do it and all that kind of stuff, but I just don't know how good that's going to look, especially since I think the general reactions to the speech were pretty favorable. I mean, like Trump or not, he knows how to put on a good show. And so, tearing it up like that, it just seemed to me a bit childish. But at the same time, I think that people have valid concerns about President Trump's behavior, but I think that consistency is key. If you think that our public officials should conform to some sort of standard of behavior or decorum, then you need to say that for all public officials. And so, as far as that goes, Yang Gang, okay, which I actually met Andrew Yang at the Atlanta airport a couple months ago, and that was pretty awesome. And so, as far as that goes, let's see. If any kid, if they're going to be so confused if they take a push in 2050, okay. So as far as that goes, let's see. Trying to figure out why did Pelosi wait? Okay, so when we think if the actions were so extreme, I want to point to something that's kind of a trend with impeachments, okay? Because when it comes down to it, it seems like, I mean, to me at least. Now, y'all can tell me if y'all are seeing something different, but it seems to me that Trump basically did what he was accused of doing, just like in the 1990s, Bill Clinton did what he was accused of doing. In the 1860s, Andrew Johnson did what he was accused of doing. So in all of these cases, one thing that I see as a common thread in all of the impeachments we've had in U.S. history is that in all three cases, it hasn't been so much like, did the president do this, but does this behavior warrant the president being removed from office? It's almost like you should divide the question, okay? It's almost like you should take the question of, okay, first of all, did the president do it? Guilty, not guilty. And then have a second vote on, should he be removed from office for this? Because it seems to me like there were several senators who said, yeah, I mean, it looks like he did this, but I wouldn't remove a duly elected president from office because of whatever happened there with because when you're looking at it, the funds for Ukraine were frozen and then they weren't frozen. They were delivered. And it would be another thing, I think, if the funds had been completely frozen, if the president of Ukraine had said there had been foul play. It's just at the end of the day, was this really a big enough deal to remove a duly elected president from office? And I think the conclusion that people came to, of course, a lot of the conclusion was based on partisanship. I mean, when you look at it, besides Mitt Romney, who has a personal vendetta with Trump, every other person in the chamber and every senator on the second article voted based on their party. So instead of calling the names, they could have just asked the senators. Chief Justice could have just asked, are you a Democrat or Republican? So the idea that there are senators in there that were really looking at the merits of the case, that's another thing that I don't think that this whole process did anything to increase Americans' views of their government, to make people trust government more. Because no matter where you are in this process, it showed itself to be a very partisan process, not a process that was governed by, we're really trying to get the facts, but it's all about your political party. That there were only a handful of people, like, you had, I guess, about 3 House Democrats and 1 Senate Republican on one charge. Okay. So as far as that goes, lay and collect taxes, all taxation is theft. Let's see what else we've got here. All right. Proud of Mitt Romney for standing up for truth and justice. Now, of course, that is where I don't know if I necessarily buy that. Of course, I don't tend to trust politicians, very much in general. But is he standing up for truth and justice? Or when you look at Mitt Romney's speech that he gave in 2016, where he eviscerated Trump before he even took office, had Mitt Romney made his judgment about Donald Trump before before Donald Trump ever came into office. And so I think that that is a legitimate question. Is he standing up for truth and justice, or was he just, was he just doing what he wanted to do? And I think so often that, people try to show themselves to be a hero when they're really not doing anything necessarily heroic. They're just doing what they want to do. So I believe that Mitt Romney cast the vote that he wanted to cast. Now that's me personally, and whether you think that that's in line with truth and justice, then that's great. But at the same time, now the other thing, I think from this thing is that if anybody should have recused themselves from this, it should have been Mitt Romney. Like the whole idea of an unsuccessful presidential candidate voting to remove a sitting president who was a successful presidential candidate from office. I'm not sure if I'm entirely comfortable with that. Like, I just, maybe what Mitt Romney did was the right thing to do, but I don't know if it was the honorable thing to do, considering that Mitt Romney ran for president and lost. And then now he's like, okay, well, I'm going to sit in judgment of somebody who won an election. That's something that I think is a bit ironic. Why? Let's see. So why is he impeached but still in office? Okay, so Chad, what we want to note here, and that's something that I think is the greatest educational lesson of this impeachment process, is that, okay, so to be impeached the president is not to remove the president from office. So if you're in a trial, for example, like you're in a courtroom, you're a lawyer, and you are cross-examining a witness, one of the things that you would seek to do is impeach the witness. Now, when you say that you want to impeach the witness, you're trying to undermine their credibility. You're trying to undermine the witness's credibility, and you impeach the witness. Now, you don't remove the witness from the witness stand, but you would impeach their credibility. So, for example, like my take on this personally, and again, people have different views on this. When people say Mitt Romney, voted his conscience, he stood up for truth and justice. Now, I would impeach Mitt Romney in the sense that I would point to his 2016 speech that he gave against Donald Trump before he was ever president, and showing that Mitt Romney had a very negative opinion of Donald Trump in the first place. So I would use that 2016 speech to impeach Mitt Romney's motives. Okay, so personally, I don't really see that he was acting as a hero. Now, where you might see someone acting as a hero, if we want to say somebody was heroic, that's where I would either see a Trump ally, somebody who had been a key Trump ally, saying, look, Donald Trump is somebody that I've worked closely with. I campaigned for him, but I have to painfully admit that I can't vote to acquit him because this has been so bad. Okay, and then also maybe this is somebody who's in a deep red Republican state who is facing re-election in November. So if we had somebody like that who was in a deep red Republican state facing re-election in November, and also a close ally of President Trump, that's when I would be thinking this was a courageous act. This is somebody that I would consider heroic. Now, on the other side as well, what if there were a Democrat that voted to acquit President Trump, a Democrat who was facing re-election in a deep blue state, and said, I don't like this process, kind of like Tulsi Gabbard did in the House when she voted present on the impeachment resolutions. She said that I can't in good conscience vote to support a blindly partisan process. But she didn't want to vote against impeachment because, she said, look, looks like Donald Trump did something wrong, but I don't want to validate this process. I think that's heroic. Now, that's another thing. Like some people said, oh, Doug Jones from Alabama, the Democratic senator from Alabama, he voted his conscience. And it's like, well, no, he voted the way he wanted to. Okay. And this is something that I think is very, very telling, because Doug Jones is having to face re-election. He's a Democrat in a deep red state. Personally, what I take out of this with Doug Jones voting to convict on both charges, I believe that he has decided that his reelection is pretty much not going to happen. I think that's what we saw there. That if Doug Jones and his staff thought that he had any chance of getting reelected in November, then he would have either voted to acquit or he might have done like Romney did and split his vote. So what I get out of Doug Jones's vote, because Doug Jones isn't like a conservative Democrat in the, in the mold of Joe Manchin or somebody like that. I mean, Doug Jones is solidly progressive, and it's extremely doubtful that Alabamans in a regular election, in a presidential election year, are going to send a Democrat back to the Senate. So I think that you can take it now as a foregone conclusion that Doug Jones has decided that he doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting reelected. I think that's what you're seeing there with Jones's vote. So as far as that goes, let's take a look at here and see if anybody's got something. Okay, heroic would be we the people doing their governing. And if we think about this, we think about Washington's farewell address. I think that today, one of the biggest lessons is thinking about Washington's farewell address, where he talked about the influence of political parties. And he said that this is something that is dangerous to a Republican form of government, because in a Republican form of government, now small r, we're not talking about the Republican Party, but in a Republican form of government, there is supposed to be some sort of concern for the republic itself. And so when you see something like this, that we're going to see that the most important indicator of how someone voted in this impeachment process was their partisan affiliation. I think that, again, I think that this has undermined Americans' confidence in government in general. And I'm not pointing the finger at either party. I think that this is something about both parties. And when Washington said that we've got to do something, we can't continue on this road and be a republic, okay? That we can't be in the situation where we are, more loyal to our party than we are to the republic itself. So I think that Washington's farewell address is something that we would all do well to think about and consider in terms of partisanship. So as far as that goes, people are talking about Iowa. You want my take on Iowa? This thing here, okay, come on now. Like this whole thing in Iowa, I'm just going to tell it like I see it. I think Bernie straight up won. Okay, I think that Bernie won, and they don't want Bernie to win. And if you think, is anybody going to trust these results that are trickling in from Iowa like 2 days later? I think Bernie, I tell you what, it may be based, but it's true. I mean, it's what we're all thinking, that Bernie, I mean, you think that Mayor Pete is more popular than Bernie? Give me a break. And when it comes down to this, that when it comes down to this, I don't think that there's going to be any legitimacy there. They tried to steal it from Bernie last time. They're trying to steal it from him again. And Kirk Douglas died that at 103. Wow. So as far as that, the DNC is trying to, I know. I mean, based is definitely a good thing. Yeah, I love you too, K-Man. You're welcome for helping you in Euro. But yeah, I think that Bernie won, and they're just doing something. Now, they could have had legitimate problems with the app, but then again, I don't see why they would have depended on an app like that. So that's another thing that's just kind of got me that. How is it that they wouldn't have a backup plan? Because you think about this, when you go with the app, there should be a backup plan. So it's almost like this thing was engineered to fail. Okay. And so, I think that when it comes down to it, that Mayor Pete, the Bernie people are not going to be happy with him. And one thing that I have learned is you don't want the Bernie people mad at you. That is something you don't want. But I think that we have a situation where Bernie was set to win, and they didn't want Bernie to have that momentum. And so they didn't give Bernie that momentum. We'll see how he does in New Hampshire. But the other thing is, when we think about the caucus versus the election, there are only a handful of states that do the caucus system, where people have to show up, they have to listen to speeches and all of that kind of stuff. I think that that really we are seeing the limitations of the caucus system. That in the primary system, you just go and you cast your vote and you go home. And it's a lot less complicated, takes up a lot less time. Now, the thing about the caucus system is it attracts the activists and it allows for people to cast more informed votes because they actually have to listen to somebody before they vote. So there are some advantages to that, but the caucus system is going to have less turnout because people who are jealous of their time aren't going to go there. They're not going to go to the caucus. So as far as that, okay, we see here that Bernie will win New Hampshire. And we see that 20%. Yeah, I think that you definitely, now 20% may be a high number, but that was certainly a factor in states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, these states that Trump won by a very narrow margin. That you did have people who had voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary, and they weren't happy that the primary as they saw it had been stolen from them with those debate questions. And I think you're looking at something here where Bernie supporters have a very legitimate gripe that their candidate is not getting a fair shake in the Democratic primary. So as far as that goes, why does Bernie keep referring to Scandinavian countries? Yeah, and that's what's fascinating, isn't it? That Bernie's whole thing about, and that's what I think Bernie has some liabilities if he is the nominee, because Bernie loves to throw around this word socialism like it's a good thing. Y'all go ahead and tell me. I've got about 75 people here. What is it you think of when you think of the word socialism? Do you have a positive or negative view of that word when you hear it? Because while that word may not be a dirty word within the Democratic Party, I think that socialism, when you ask the average American, certainly when you ask a Republican, I think most independents, and even a lot of Democrats, I think moderate Democrats will tell you that they're not socialist. And so when we think about this, that the Democrat, I do think that the DNC is trying to keep Bernie from being the nominee, but also think that there are reasons why they're doing that, okay? Because even though there are these polls that show, oh, Bernie could beat Trump in this state, or Bernie could beat Trump nationwide, Bernie's feet have never been held to the fire. And he has never really been scrutinized for how much did you want to raise taxes again? What is this socialism thing? And so as far as that goes, I don't think that Bernie would be a strong nominee for the Democratic Party. I think he's very popular among his supporters, but I think that he would be a problematic nominee. Now, of course, the Democrats had a problematic nominee last time. I guess it could be argued the Republicans did as well, but I think with the Democrats, it was shown that, even more problematic. So with that, that you think, okay, so some people look at socialism as different things. Yeah, a guy named Bernie, and he's never felt the heat. Okay, yeah, but I think when it comes down to it, I think that is going to be a liability. So we'll see who the Democrats end up nominating, but certainly after this impeachment thing, it does look like Donald Trump is, almost, like Gallup says, he is just about to where he has like a net plus in his approval rating. So the most recent poll that I looked at earlier this week, it had Trump with 50% disapproval, 49% approval. And then where's that 1% of the population that has no opinion about Donald Trump? It's usually about 5%. But I think it's funny that there are Americans that are like, Trump? No, I don't really have an opinion on that guy. I haven't met those people. Do those people exist? Let's see. Are Americans or United States citizens? Okay, so Den End Studio. That's an interesting question. What are you getting at there? All right. So as far as that goes, wake up, people. All right, cool cat. So as far as that goes, now I think it's not. But I'm talking about being scrutinized as far as being attacked by Republicans. Bernie has not. Like, I just think in a general election campaign, there are a lot of liabilities that aren't necessarily going to be in the. They're not going to come out in the Democratic primary. So I do see where people are concerned. Now, as far as that goes, Let's see. There is no America on the map, just the United States. Should Trump be impeached? Well, Trump was impeached. Okay. So he was impeached. Remember that. He was impeached. He was not removed from office. Now, that is, Todd, that is an excellent question. How do you think historians will write about this 100 plus years from now? Now, it is, you can't really know. You can't really know, but because we can't really predict how things will go. But at the same time, I think that we are going to have a hard time. I think with this impeachment process in particular, that it's hard to tell a story. I think that with the Clinton impeachment, at least you had a story that everybody was like, oh, this is what happened. This is what happened. And people had pretty strong opinions about it. In this case, I think that, you don't really have a story. Like, it's just like, okay, where is Ukraine again? Like, most Americans don't know where Ukraine is, or maybe they say that's basically Russia, right? Or something like that. And so when we think about, like, what Americans think about Ukraine, it's just not an emotional enough issue. I think when you're looking at that, what do I think about Andrew Yang? I met him in November. He seemed like a nice guy. So yeah, I think I definitely wish him the best. All right, so almost all Republicans like Trump, while the Democrats are very split up, can't seem to agree with each other. Yeah, now that's one thing that you've seen today if you're taking AP government. We're thinking about political polarization, okay? And that's something that if you're taking AP government, you want to remember that term. Why is it that all the Democrats are voting one way, all the Republicans are voting the other way? You are looking at political polarization, where basically we see that the difference between Republicans and Democrats is greater now than it has been at most points during this time. All right. Well, people remember Biden's or Romney's names. Now, as far as that goes, yeah. Now, Romney got himself, which maybe that's what he was trying to do. Romney got himself like an asterisk or a footnote because it was said before today, no senator from the president's own party has ever voted to convict the president in an impeachment trial. And so Romney today became the only member of the president's party to vote to convict the president in an impeachment trial. He voted to remove him from office. So will Romney be remembered in any meaningful sense? Probably not, but it'll be an interesting little footnote. Like, if you're at the bar playing trivia or something like that 100 years from now, because you'll have extended lives, right? Thanks to technology, you'll be all cybernetic. You'll be playing it, playing trivia at the bar, and then they'll say, like, okay, who was the Republican senator who voted to convict President Trump? And people be like, who was that guy again? And then somebody be like, oh, Mitt Romney. Okay, so it's something that like a history buff may know something, but by and large, no, I don't think that that Mitt Romney is going to be somebody that we're going to be thinking that 100 years from now, that's going to be something that we're going to see here. All right. So as far as that goes, yeah, I know that's gonna be funny, isn't it? When we think about a DBQ. Now, y'all, we're getting into, people are starting to come in that weren't here for other parts of this live broadcast. I've said a few things. Like, first of all, I'm just not shy about, I tend to be right of center. I think people should know where people are coming from so that they can filter that stuff out there. I kind of refer to myself often as a right-wing liberal, which it makes sense in Europe. It doesn't make as much sense in the United States, but it would be much easier to categorize my political views if I were a European versus being in the United States. So as far as that goes, that's that. And then I think that, with Nancy Pelosi, you can think it was funny what she did, but at the same time, if somebody's criticizing Donald Trump for compromising the dignity of the presidency, they should also be equally ready to say that, Nancy Pelosi's behavior last night was unbecoming of the Speaker of the House. Like, it was an action that was beneath the dignity of the office of Speaker of the House. And then, now somebody can say that President Trump certainly has acted in ways that are beneath the dignity of the president. But you can't have it both ways. You can't like complain about how Trump has, just undermined the dignity of our government, and then on the other hand say that, oh, well, that was such a great thing that Nancy Pelosi did. And so as far as that goes, the equivalent of a red Tory slash progressive conservative, that is kind of interesting there. I'll have to look that up. Yeah, I've actually done AP government. I've taught AP government on 2 occasions before, and I'm teaching AP government again now. It's not a class that I teach every year, but it is a class that I have experience teaching, and I am teaching that this semester. So told that she was recycling her copy. Okay, so recycling the copy. All right, so interesting. All right, so your opinion on an eventual return. Okay, yeah, I don't think we're going to see a return to a federal union that existed before the Civil War. I think that the Civil War did answer the question, like, is the United States a union of sovereign states? The United States are, as they would often be referred to before the Civil War. And then, the United States is, okay? Like when it comes down to it, I think that the United States has become a nation, and the Civil War had a lot to do with that. I think that we've really gone too far down the national path. To go back to a traditional states' rights kind of way of organizing things. I don't see that happening. I think that the trend in the United States, with a few exceptions, but we definitely have trended since the ratification of the Constitution. Toward a more national government. Of course, we have remnants of federalism, but a lot of our federalism is remnant federalism. For example, where technically the federal government doesn't control our schools, but at the same time they give money to the states for education. The states accept that money, and then the states have to do everything the federal government says. There were several states that used to have a drinking age of 18, and then the federal government said, well, if it's less than 21, you're going to lose highway funds. And so that's something that we're seeing with that we basically have a national drinking age of 21 because the federal government uses its money in order to get the states to do things. Now, then we've got the states still build roads, but they do it with a lot of federal money. We're talking about the federal interstate. The experiment of the Constitution putting we the people in charge. Now, as far as that goes, do we the people necessarily have a say anymore? That's something to kind of think about. I need to do a video on theories of democracy. Thoughts on this impeachment being revenge for the Clintons? I'm not sure about that. Okay. Now, I do think that some of this, I mean, you see Joe Biden's momentum, I think, has definitely been compromised by this whole thing. So I think if somebody's going to argue that the people advancing this were anti-Biden Democrats, I think that there's something to be said for that, because I mean, Trump ended up stronger because of this when you look at all the polling numbers. But I think that Joe Biden has come out of this as the big loser because he was something of a presumptive nominee, and that we'll see as far as that's the case. Now, Iowa, New Hampshire, we may or may not see Joe Biden do well there, but I think you're going to see Joe Biden do quite well when you start to see primaries go to the South and the Midwest. All right, let's see here. Now it's going to pass AP Gov. I'm glad I can help. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's see. I'm not sure what you agree with, but if I said something, then great. All right. So thank y'all a lot. I just wanted to kind of chat with y'all about the impeachment process, and the chat has been very, very interesting. I should do this more often. Just get up there and just do a little live chat on stuff that's happening. So it's always good to make sure people are following current events, put them into historical perspective, and then to kind of give my thoughts on that. So with that, let's go ahead and just say your last things if you want to say something here. All right. Yes. Okay. Glad to help you. And yeah, I definitely can do some more of these live chats. So we will do that down the road. And ladies and gentlemen, do I think that he will be elected? I think that when it comes down to it, Trump's reelection, I think, is going to come down to two things. Does the economy stay like it is? Okay. Because here's the thing, like, more people say they dislike Trump than like Trump, but when they're asked about the economy's getting very strong ratings. It's very difficult to take a president down when there's a good economy, even if people personally dislike that president. Now, the other thing you want to look for is who's the Democratic nominee. I think those are the two most important things when we're looking at will Trump be reelected? Does the economy stay strong? And who is the Democratic nominee? And those two things, but I definitely wouldn't say that Trump being reelected or not reelected is a foregone conclusion at this point. All right. So with that, yeah, Bernie supporters, we'll see what happens when the Iowa results come in. Best of luck with that, and I'll do some things. Do some things here. This has been fun. We'll do it more often. It is always a pleasure.